This is The Wire for 2300 Zulu, December 4th, 2024. Precedence is routine. Information cutoff is 2200. Bottom line up front. Situation in South Korea somewhat stabilized as developments continue. United Healthcare CEO assassinated in New York City. Hama in danger of encirclement in Syria. Beginning with international events. In Syria, rebel forces continue their assault on Hama as Russian forces continue to lose terrain and equipment. This morning, rebel forces allegedly photographed the capture of a Podlet K-1 radar system in Hama, which is used in conjunction with the S-300 and S-400 air defense systems. Analysts comment. By this afternoon, it appears that Hama may be close to becoming encircled by rebel forces, with the only point of egress to the south of the city becoming threatened by HTS forces, which have pushed south from the east and west of the city in a classic pincer movement throughout the day. In South Korea, the impacts from yesterday's events continue to be felt throughout Seoul as lawmakers begin impeachment proceedings against President Yoon. So far, the military situation has reached a point of stability, though it is uncertain as to who has been arrested so far. On the home front, in New York, the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, was assassinated this morning by an unknown assailant on the sidewalk outside of the Hilton Midtown Hotel. The assassin remains at large. Analysts comment. Of note, this incident appears to be a more professional assassination and not an incident of random street crime. Analyst comments for this wire. The additional details that have become public during yesterday's rapid pace of events in South Korea have been interesting. In typical South Korean fashion, the situation has mostly been a roller coaster of events, with many power players changing perspectives and positions in rapid order. The coup that never was continues to be a series of exceptionally strange events that do not adhere to the normally observed characteristics of a full-blown military coup. Militarily speaking, the exact military units that took part in the failed coup attempt remain unidentified. Following the high tensions in the morning, throughout the day, other unidentified military forces were observed outside the homes of prominent opposition politicians, as well as many journalists. Separately, several ROK defense officials stated that they had no idea what was happening at the time, and only heard of the activities at the National Assembly building from the local news broadcasts. This could indicate several possibilities that are usually inherent to similar coup attempts such as this one. For one, many of the generals who were indeed supportive of Yoon during this crisis will undoubtedly remain silent now that Yoon's attempt failed. On the other hand, compared to the actual size of South Korea's military and the speed at which events transpired, it is very likely that most of the military, probably to include many senior leaders, actually did not know what was happening and therefore had no hand in any of this. Additional details complicate the involvement of military forces. For instance, some of the teams that breached the windows and gained entry into the National Assembly building appear to have been outfitted with weapons that were for training purposes. Specifically, some citizens were able to photograph the configuration of some of the soldiers' weapons, which indicated that at least several of them were outfitted with training bolts. This means that in at least some cases, soldiers were incapable of firing live rounds, but rather outfitted in a training role. Other soldiers were observed to have no magazines in their sidearms as well. This detail complicates the picture significantly, with a few possibilities remaining plausible. The deployment of troops to the National Assembly building could have been a very dangerous bluff, with the soldiers never really intending to militarily overthrow anyone, but rather to arrest the president's opposition. After all, when launching a very serious and deliberate military coup in the most literal of senses, it is generally advised to do so with actual live rounds in one's firearm. However, even to do this would be exceptionally dangerous to the soldier. To a civilian, in the heat of the moment, when windows are being shattered and soldiers are breaking through barricades, a military force may just find out the true meaning of what a resistance might look like. Likewise, the complete silence and lack of any action from Yoon for several hours during the crisis was perplexing. History very strongly indicates that when one launches a coup, time is of the essence. One must go all in, or not at all, so to speak. President Yoon, sending a few platoons of troops and a handful of helicopters to arrest his political opposition, but also not really doing anything more than that, very strongly indicates that he did not take the initiative to actually achieve his goals. The 3 helicopters that were observed mobilizing to the National Assembly building landed at the soccer field to the northwest of the building. Despite earlier reports, no other aircraft appeared to have taken part in yesterday's events. Of note, a substantial amount of older footage circulated on social media during the incident, leading many to believe that mechanized infantry had deployed to the capital region. This did occur to some degree, as protesters did observe some armored cars maneuvering to take up station in the capital region. However, many of the video clips showing substantial movement of infantry fighting vehicles, or IFVs, were older clips from a previous military exercise. Regarding what President Yoon's actual plan was, this largely remains a mystery. Though highly speculative, it is possible that his general idea was to roughly follow the plot of an old World War II story, the tale of Operation Valkyrie. This was an operation that was conceived in Germany late in the war as a way of ousting Hitler and seizing control of the government. The plan involved invoking a secret continuity of governance plan that would allow certain leadership to, in an emergency, take over command of the government and oust any loyalists. At face value, this could be what Yoon tried to do, at least partly. The obvious major difference is that he was not intending to unseat himself, but rather leverage South Korea's well-known response plans to his advantage, to solidify power. Though again, this is very speculative at this time, this could account for the varying levels of involvement by military forces. Some loyalist units probably deployed to the National Assembly building in the same way that they would enact wartime plans of a communist invasion. Generally speaking, South Korea's entire military hierarchy, infrastructure, and ideology is built around one idea: combating a North Korean invasion. As such, South Korea has extensively detailed plans for continuity of governance in the event that a war were to break out again. The president, being the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, knows this, which is why he may have sought to intentionally overreact to a political issue and frame the situation as if the communists were coming. This would be really the only way to achieve the desired effect of bringing the military in to support him. In short, President Yoon's actions were probably far more significant than just a mere political stunt, but fell short of what one might expect a real coup to look like. Either way, in the clear light of day, the progression of events has largely fallen apart and re-entered the political arena. Impeachment proceedings have begun. However, President Yoon appears to be taking the position of trying to walk back his actions. Following yesterday's failed coup, or technically an auto-coup, there are usually only two choices available to those whose attempts fail: flee the country or resign immediately and hope to not be thrown in prison, or usually worse. President Yoon seems to have opted for the third, less common option, to claim that he wasn't serious and wants to forget the whole thing. This is most sharply evidenced by his party, which originally completely disowned him due to his actions, vowing to oppose an impeachment effort. At the present moment, President Yoon seems to believe that he may politically survive this event, whatever it actually was. If Yoon indeed wanted to overthrow his own government to stay in power, he did everything incorrectly. He hesitated, allowed comms to remain, didn't have or even notify most military leadership, and sent not nearly enough troops to actually do anything. On the other hand, if this was a grand political stunt, the South Korean people are well within their purview to have thought that armed soldiers and helicopters were a legitimate and lethal coup attempt. In any society on Earth, certain unspoken rules of engagement come about on a human instinctive level. If a soldier points a weapon at their own citizenry, training rounds or not, that citizenry is well within their instincts to treat that as a legitimate threat and respond accordingly. When armed soldiers are introduced into a situation, rules and regulations no longer matter. Rightly or wrongly, the people in the National Assembly building and those demonstrating outside thought this was real. Gaslighting the people into thinking that this was just a political stunt probably won't fly even in South Korea. This is why President Yoon has faced such scrutiny over this incident. Things could have turned out very differently than they did. It is a miracle that no one was killed during yesterday's events. South Korea probably got closer to the precipice than any other nation in recent memory without actually going over the edge. This may take some time for even South Korean citizens to realize, who may be used to the less serious tradition of crazy political events being relatively normal. This case, however, may prove to be quite different in due time. More poignantly, these events provide a very important case study for examination by citizens everywhere. All in all, this event was beyond the pale of normalcy even for South Korean politics, which tends to be rather kinetic and interesting by Western standards. On the other hand, if there ever was a place where a president can launch an armed military coup and declare martial law, only to essentially say, "Just kidding," and that actually work, it would be in South Korea. More broadly, a completely unspoken detail that remains extremely relevant revolves around what the United States was up to during this crisis. South Korean special forces and American advisors and counterparts are exceptionally closely intertwined, probably more so than any other American military partnership around the world. Nothing happens on the Korean peninsula, in the north or south, without at least a dozen different U.S. military commands from all service branches knowing about it and being directly involved to some degree. As these details become more public, it will be important to examine what the role of the United States was during this crisis. This concludes The Wire for 2300 Zulu, December 4th, 2024.